Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to see you here this morning. My name is Anika Nicolaas Ponder. I'm here with my colleague and dear friend Dàmir Belltheus Avdic, and we're going to tell you more about new climate narratives and why we need them. So we have this on the menu for you today. We want to set the scene, like what is the state of our climate right now. Then we're going to go into a couple of, I think, exciting scientific energy transition stories, and I'll swoop back in with why we need to tell these with a new narrative and kind of connecting the dots in this positive sort of story that we need to hear right now. And then hopefully we'll have time to do a quiz because we want to hear from you what you think of all of these ideas. So, as you've heard, we are from ICEM, that is the Institute for Climate Protection, Energy and Mobility. We are a non-profit think tank and an NGO, and there's about like 60 of us based in Berlin, and we aim to accelerate and achieve the global energy transition and to reach our climate targets on time. Now, that is a tiny, tiny little task, obviously, super easy. But we do that with our wonderful expert departments. We have an energy law department, a mobility department, a research academy for PhD work, and then there's the climate and innovation department, and that is us. We're a very cute bunch, a very interdisciplinary team. We have cultural, social, political scientists, economists, design thinkers, and graphic designers, and perhaps most importantly, Tony the dog, who is our in-house acceptance expert, and he's just the cutest thing ever. And what we work on is really kind of like how to integrate and make sure that how to integrate people and make sure that they benefit from this decentralization of power that is the energy transition. So we do that through new participatory mechanisms in the legal framework in Germany, but we also do that with innovative science communication projects, because you need to connect with people, you need to get them to care and engage before you can do any kind of participatory activity. So just on that note, I wanted to share this project with you that we worked on, which is the infographic energy transition coloring book. It is a wonderful piece of science communication that we produced together with Ellery Studio. You just saw Bernd. We collaborate on a lot of creative things together. This book tells the story of climate change and the energy transition in 33 beautiful infographic spreads, and actually just as we're going into the history of everything, Hannah was the first illustrator and designer who worked with us on that coloring book a long time ago, so it's really wonderful to have all of those people in the house now. So it's 33 beautiful infographic spreads that really come to life when you color them in. And that is of course also a really good way to learn, because as you're coloring these spreads in, you're also like engaged with the material for longer, so you retain more of the information. Now, we kept kind of like different target audiences in mind when we were making this book. Obviously ourselves, as climate nerds, we wanted to see something that was like fun to read and engage with for once, but we were also thinking of kids, the next generations, curious grown-ups, other energy experts. But for us as well, as a non-profit NGO, we need to be able to have access to high-level decision makers. That is difficult, you know, they always run away the moment that a minister does a keynote. You can never really grab them at a conference unless you have something cute. So we set ourselves the target, you know what, we're going to go and talk to those grumpy German decision makers. We're going to get them to sit down with us and listen to our story. And fast forward 1 year later, here we are, our colleague Eugen, sitting down with Angela Merkel, having a glass of Riesling and talking about the coloring book. And look, you know, she's even smiling over this, which I think is a wonderful accomplishment. And then just last year as well, I had the opportunity to sit down with Chancellor Scholz, again to talk about science communication, again over a glass of Riesling, which is I think the red thread with our chancellors. And it was a really wonderful opportunity to kind of get access to these kinds of politicians. And again, smiling here, the power of infographics and possibly Riesling. Enough about wine. Let's talk about climate. Let's begin by saying that the climate has never been more of a mainstream topic. There's never been more policies, more strategies, more activism around it, and that is a really good thing. One can say that this kind of public political sort of mainstreaming in our consciousness really culminated with the Paris Agreement 10 years ago, when virtually all countries around the world finally said, yes, the climate crisis is an issue, and yes, we should collectively do something against it, pledge in our NDCs, our naturally determined contributions, to all withdraw and reduce our emissions as much as we can, so that we don't go over 2 degrees increase and even aim for 1.5. Now, fast forward, you probably know this, 10 years later on, so much has happened, a lot of amazing policies and projects have been implemented, but we are still falling short. You can see with this chart, at the top is where we're kind of heading if we are going to meet all of our targets and the policies we have in place right now. You can see that emissions are kind of going down later on, so that's good, I suppose. But if you can see, like it says, the temperature increase associated with that range is still up to 3 degrees increase if we do everything right. Where we need to be is down there, that radical slope in the emissions, that green line that doesn't slow down, it doesn't stagnate, it drops. And it drops basically right now or even 5 years ago. So that is the ambition gap that we're seeing right now. We are not doing that. Emissions are actually rising, and the only exemption was the COVID years when production and travel halted. So obviously, we're seeing the consequences. 2023, again, record-breaking. In fact, global temperatures rose to 1.52 degrees, which is, a lot. And it makes you think, is the 1.5-degree target now behind us? Not quite. There were a couple of natural phenomena also combining with the climate crisis last year and this year, like El Nino. These things will dissipate. So if we now radically increase our ambition and reduce our emissions, and with natural phenomena like El Nino dissipating, there is a chance we can still get to below 1.5 degrees increase in temperature, but of course that window is closing quite fast. Yes. On that note...
Thank you. Now, I would like to talk about some specific numbers and trajectories when it comes to the to climate change. I see. Yes. So upwards and downwards pressure on greenhouse gas emissions are shown, for instance, in this cool scenario that the International Energy Agency came up with, which shows how emissions are expected to increase and decrease in the coming years. This is a scenario that shows how we might reach net zero by 2050. Now, all things kept equal, emissions increase due to population and economic growth. So, for instance, if we did nothing between 2020 and 2030, they would increase by 24%. However, thankfully, there's a lot of mitigation behaviors and measures going on, so that they will actually be half as high as they otherwise would be. Between 2030 and 2050 is where we will have to do the real lion's share of work, because all of the low-hanging fruit will have been picked. Fortunately, GDP and emissions can be and are, in fact, decoupled in many places, especially in developing countries. We know that this sort of downwards pressure on emissions is a lot stronger than upwards pressure. Carbon intensity, that is the amount of CO2 emitted per unit of GDP, is decreasing. And in the EU, for instance, since 1990, GDP in absolute terms has grown by 65%, while emissions have dropped by 25%. In developing countries, things are a little different. The upwards pressure is generally stronger, mostly due to faster population and economic growth. No one will be surprised to see that the absolute emissions of China have absolutely exploded since 1980, especially since the year 2000. And even though there too, carbon intensity per unit of GDP is still falling. But if we talk a little bit about countries, or the sort of revenge of geopolitics that we've seen lately, because hydrocarbons, fossil fuels, are not merely a question of the climate, and there's a number of countries which are major exporters of hydrocarbons, which are spoilers in today's sort of liberal order, most notably Russia. According to the RAND Corporation, Russia is expected to spend a bit over $130 billion on its military activities throughout the year 2024. All of this will be covered entirely by money spent by the EU on Russian hydrocarbon exports. And of course, the EU is not the only customer there. So that's something to keep in mind, perhaps. The average EU citizen has paid more than 400 euros to Russia directly, more or less, since the beginning of the war. But all is not lost. We also know that various measures by the EU have led to a shortfall in income that Russia would otherwise have received, and especially increase in renewable electricity production capacity. Germany is a very good example of this, because miraculously they managed to completely phase out natural gas imported directly from Russia within 6 months of the beginning of the war. This was meant to be impossible, but turns out that it wasn't so hard after all. So what else is Germany doing? Well, it's very ambitious, which is, of course, a great place to start, right? It wants to be climate neutral by 2045, which is a bit earlier than most countries. There is a partial goal on the way there, which is to decrease emissions by 65% by 2030 over their levels in 1990. Some major challenges that are still facing the country is the super strong coal lobby and the famous sort of national love story with internal combustion engines, and then issues which affect all other countries as well, which is the difficulty in powering industrial processes with green techniques and electricity, and of course supply chain and labor bottlenecks. Things are coming along quite well, actually. Germany has made some halting progress, and we are miraculously also on track to reach the 2030 goal of reducing emissions by 65% over their 1990 level. On any given day in Germany, electricity will be produced, around 75% of it will come from renewable sources. And this is increasing all the time now. And another really cool thing, which is quite rare, which you don't see much in other countries, is that actually a lot of renewable power capacity in Germany is owned and partly also operated by private individuals, so not banks, corporations, what have you. In 2020, this number was 40%. And here we see some happy farmers with their happy wind turbine. Since the war began, Germany has also gotten its head on straight and has increased its targets. Hydrogen is on the map for the first time, especially PV targets have increased, it is to quadruple. And amazingly, this too is on track, actually, although there are some bottlenecks related to wind. Now, no one is doing this out of charity, If you do everything we need to do to achieve these targets for 2030, the return on investment will be 40% on average. The fiscal multiplier is 2.7. Over 400,000 jobs can be created. So we know the way. We have it mapped. We know it's possible. What else is left to do? What are the sort of the bottlenecks, the holdouts? Well, if we look at emissions and renewables by sector in Germany, we know that electricity is decarbonizing very, very fast. But the picture is less good for industrial processes and heating, and especially transport. This is due to the fact that many of them cannot easily be electrified. But also there is the rebound effect, which is that the more efficient engines become, the better insulation is in buildings, the bigger cars and the bigger houses become instead. So there's quite some way to go, but this can partly be fixed by the introduction of green fuels. Now you remember this super cool graph from the beginning, and how the sort of low-hanging fruit, like we're on it, electrification, increased efficiency. In the longer term, the International Energy Agency here expects that behavioral changes and carbon capture and utilization and storage will make a big difference between 2030 and 2050. I'm not so sure, considering the car problem. We can, however, electrify more thanks to technological progress and new fuels. Electricity famously is very difficult to store and bottle, and renewable production is intermittent. But what we can do is we can transform it into hydrogen for storage and for direct use as fuels, and also hydrogen derivatives, such as, for instance, ammonia, for which we did with this really cool explainer poster, which shows how ammonia can be used as a sustainable ship fuel. And with that, I hand back over to Anika.
Thank you so much, Dàmir. It's a really good onboarding to the energy transition. So now I wanted to talk to you about the new climate narratives and why we need them. So remember this slide with the ambition gap, which is pretty depressing? So what if there was a way to get people to be more active, to care more, to do more for our climate, to not just, eat a little bit less meat, but I'm talking, most importantly, vote for more climate ambitious politicians, because we need to hold big polluters accountable. That is also a governmental issue. We in democracies have that power too. Now the good news is people do care. Almost 90% of Europeans want their government to do more to tackle the climate crisis. And that goes beyond Europe too. This is a map from all over the world where basically more than 70% of people at the very least thinks, yes, we should do more to tackle this crisis. Now, how do we motivate them? How do we get them empowered with knowledge? This is where new narratives and storytelling come into play. Stories move and inspire people. This has always been true. And it's really high time now for us climate and energy specialists, but also professional storytellers like the established media, to join us in this effort and not only communicate death and doom and wildfires, but the amazing solutions and breakthroughs and social innovations that are literally happening every day that give hope and motivation to people. Those stories deserve a spotlight too. As it is right now, 95% of reporting on climate is negative, overwhelmingly so, focusing on all of the things that we have to give up to reach our goals, rather than on all of the things that we stand to gain from creating this beautiful new future. It is so bad and depressing, you just want to stay at home and hide rather than go out and engage. And it's not just the narrative, it's also the format. A lot of great research comes out all the time, but it's packed in these big reports that even I don't want to read, and it's my job. So, long story short, we need new narratives that tap into good storytelling methodologies, personable sort of stories of success, grassroots movements, things that people can relate to. We've heard from Dàmir that in the energy transition alone, there's so many heroes, really, if you frame it that way. There's innovators and grassroots activists. There's climate litigators who are holding people to account. There's villains. There's the fossil fuel lobby. There's populist governments. There's Russia. This is an amazing story for any of us who enjoy that kind of storytelling. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Star Wars. That could be our story. A ragtag group of rebels saving the world from destruction and evil. So we also need to get that out there, diverse formats, whatever, videos or social media, in our case, an infographic coloring book, or collaborations with Berlin's drag queen extraordinaire, Viagra Falls. All of that, try it out. The world is your creative oyster. So long story short, we need to start connecting the dots between these positive climate stories and create a strong narrative that engages people. Yes, the situation is dire, but if we all band together, we can still reach our goals and make a better world along the way. Thank you very much. That's us from ICANN.
Now, you guys are up. Would you please consider participating in a little Menti quiz that we created. And for the tech folks, if you could please turn on the Menti screen.
Menti screen.
In the meantime, I just want to say, look, we have a few of these, the coloring books, and also some really cool feminist and renewable energy stickers.
Yes, we were collaborating on the gender equality project that Bernd mentioned. We are always doing the science parts and the creative part from Ellery. So I would suggest join our quiz. And we're going to ask you a little bit about the answers that you're giving us very quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. The first person to be interested in sharing their opinion on the questions gets a coloring book. So, that's a motivator.
Yeah.
Now I've built it up quite a bit, but the screen is not there yet. So maybe I can just see show of hands. Is anybody here in this audience a communicator, in the profession of getting your message or your work out there, over there? Okay, great. Is it directly in the crypto world that you work and do this effort? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you. That's really interesting, because I noticed for us climate scientists, and especially in Germany, it's a little more conservative. These new expertises are definitely not integrated in those disciplines, in those thematic areas. And I really like that is something that people are becoming more aware of right now. Yes.
So you can start voting now if you like. Did everyone who wanted to manage to log on there? You can also go to Menti and use the code that's at the top of the screen there. Okay, well, it's good to know that most people think that climate change is a real and present problem. I don't know for any sort of anyone who doesn't think it's an issue. We don't really have a lot of time to go into that right now, perhaps, but like we will be happy to have a conversation about it later. These are a lot of the questions that we sort of ask ourselves in this field. You know, what can individuals do? If governments, then which ones? You know, there's a lot of finger pointing, a lot of people saying, like I saw on this map of countries, of how many people in a given country think that their government should do something about it. Finland, for instance, is relatively low, and I imagine that a lot of Finns are like, well, how much can we do? How much is Finland responsible for? And so on. Still voting, but yeah, I think I would agree with most of you all on these topics. I think let's go on to the next. This one's more existential.
Okay, it's a nice little insight before lunch. Oh, maybe a nice transition as well for the next talk.
So this is, I think, the question of how much individuals can do, I think, is one that we often ask ourselves, the one that we often hear, or like, does the collective versus sort of individual action. Oh, I love how there's like has like the hope part is yeah, I guess it's as well as one can hope, perhaps. And the government's the relative distrust for governments over individuals is also what I would expect in this bunch. I'm with you. And finally, what do you think in terms of strategies or solutions? What's the best way to? Unfortunately, you can only pick one.
Oof.
Oh, there are people who believe in governments.
They're not unicorns. They do exist. Yes.
Personally, I would lobby governments, not because I believe in them, but just because they're the only ones who have the power to really affect genuine change.
All right. Thanks so much, everybody, for participating. I would love to do a little deep dive into one of those answers, but the timer just ran out. And before like the comical stage hook drags us off here, maybe we wrap it up here and
see if there are any questions.
Approach us if you would like a. There's a question here.
That was very quick.
Let's do it.
Now. Yeah. Awesome. Guys, it's a pleasure. Thank you for raising such an important topic today. I also made a couple of notes for me to ask afterwards. So, first of all, I love the part of the book, like which you presented. I love the way it's gonna been drawn and so on. As well as you mentioned that you having struggle with finding those like real decision makers and so on. So, but why are you coming from the standpoint of those guys? Or you can try to go from the standpoint of their kids, you know? They might like it better, huh?
Get to them via their kids. I like that. It's a nice takeaway. Yeah, that's the point. That's the idea with this, of course. And when it comes to actually lobbying our complex research, it's good to have a sit-down one-on-one. And obviously, the promotional kind of purposes are also significant. It's cool to see that a tiny NGO like ours can make an impact like that and talk to chancellors. That's a rare opportunity. But yeah, I'll keep the kids in mind.
So
it's a blessing.
Thank you very much once more for Anika and Dàmir. We don't have time for more questions, but I guess feel free to approach afterwards.